Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you is going to absolutely blow your mind. The Cleveland Browns organization is on the verge of an absolute nuclear meltdown that's going to send shockwaves rippling through every single corner of the National Football League. We're talking about an organizational earthquake so massive, so earth-shattering, so completely unprecedented that this story is going to dominate sports talk radio, television programs, and social media feeds for months to come. What we've uncovered through multiple league insiders, anonymous sources with direct access to the highest levels of Browns ownership, and whispered conversations in NFL circles is nothing short of explosive. And trust me when I tell you that by the time you finish hearing what I have to say, you're going to understand exactly why this represents the biggest story in professional football right now. Kevin Stefanski's days as head coach of the Cleveland Browns aren't just numbered anymore. We're not talking about speculation or rumor or wishful thinking from frustrated fans who've watched this team spiral into complete dysfunction. We're talking about concrete reality. Multiple sources are confirming that Stefanski's tenure is essentially over, finished, done. The only question remaining isn't whether he'll be fired, it's when the hammer finally drops. And according to everything we're hearing, that moment could come shockingly soon. We could be talking about days or possibly even hours before Jimmy Haslam, the owner who has presided over one of the most chaotic and dysfunctional decades in NFL history, finally does what everyone has been screaming for him to do. Fire Kevin Stefanski and completely dismantle this catastrophically failed coaching regime. But here's where this story goes from merely interesting to absolutely mind-blowing. The replacement candidate isn't some up-and-coming coordinator from a successful organization. It's not some hot college coach making the jump to the professional ranks. It's not even some retread former head coach looking for one more opportunity. The man Jimmy Haslam has apparently selected to rescue this franchise, to resurrect this offense, and to develop the young quarterback the Browns just drafted is none other than Jon Gruden. Yes, you heard that correctly. Jon Gruden, the former Oakland Raiders and Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach. Jon Gruden, the Monday Night Football analyst who became a household name for his football obsession and quarterback guru reputation. Jon Gruden, the man who won a Super Bowl and built a legendary career as one of the most creative and innovative offensive minds of his entire generation. Now, before we go any further, let me be crystal clear about something. This isn't just speculation or clickbait or some hot take designed to generate controversy. According to multiple sources with direct knowledge of the conversations happening at the absolute highest levels of the Browns organization, Gruden isn't just a candidate for the offensive coordinator position. He is reportedly the candidate, the only candidate that matters, the done deal that's just waiting for the official press release and introductory press conference. If our sources are accurate, and everything we've heard from multiple independent channels suggests they absolutely are, Jon Gruden could be walking into Cleveland Browns headquarters as soon as this coming Monday to begin his new role orchestrating an offense that has been an absolute dumpster fire under Kevin Stefanski's leadership. So how did we get to this absolutely insane moment in Cleveland Browns history? How did a coach who won Coach of the Year just a few seasons ago find himself on the verge of being unceremoniously fired with his offense ranked near the absolute bottom of the league in virtually every meaningful statistical category? The answer to that question is actually a fascinating story within the story. And understanding how we arrived at this moment is crucial to comprehending why the changes coming are so dramatic and so necessary. Kevin Stefanski has been on the hot seat all season long. That much everyone paying attention already knows. His offense has been completely non-functional, ranking near the basement of the league in points scored, yards gained, third down conversions, red zone efficiency, and basically every other metric you could possibly use to evaluate offensive performance. The quarterback situation has been an absolute revolving door of failure and frustration. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and now Shedeur Sanders have all taken turns behind center, and not a single one of them has found any sustained success operating within Stefanski's antiquated, predictable, conservative offensive system. The play calling has been so vanilla, so risk-averse, so completely devoid of creativity that opposing defensive coordinators can practically call out the plays before they happen. The offensive line has struggled mightily with protection assignments. The running game has been maddeningly inconsistent. The receivers can't seem to get separation. And through absolutely all of it, through every single embarrassing performance and humiliating defeat, Kevin Stefanski has deflected blame, made excuses, and refused to take genuine accountability for the systematic failures happening on his watch week after week. But the real breaking point, the moment when Jimmy Haslam apparently decided that enough was finally enough, came with how Stefanski has handled the Shedeur Sanders situation. And this is where things get really complicated, really messy, and really revealing about the internal dysfunction plaguing this organization. Sanders was drafted in the 5th round against the explicit advice and strong objections of then general manager Paul DePodesta, who reportedly wanted absolutely nothing to do with selecting Sanders. DePodesta understood the complications that would come with drafting the son of NFL legend and current Colorado head coach Deion Sanders. He knew that the national spotlight would be absolutely blinding and unrelenting. He understood that every single decision, every snap count, every play call, every post-game comment would be scrutinized and dissected by national analysts and millions of passionate Colorado fans who had followed Sanders throughout his college career in Boulder. DePodesta knew the pressure would be unbearable, and he wanted no part of that circus atmosphere. But here's the thing about Jimmy Haslam. He didn't become a billionaire by listening to people who told him what he couldn't or shouldn't do. Haslam overruled his general manager and selected Sanders anyway, and he did it for reasons that had as much to do with business considerations as football talent evaluation. Don't get me wrong, Sanders certainly has legitimate talent. He's got an NFL-caliber arm, excellent football intelligence, and comes from a family with deep football knowledge and connections. But the primary reason Haslam wanted Sanders had to do with what the young quarterback represents from a marketing and revenue perspective. Shedeur Sanders fills seats. He sells jerseys and merchandise. He generates buzz and excitement and national media attention that the Cleveland Browns haven't experienced in literal decades. With Cleveland preparing to move into a brand new stadium in just a couple of years, Haslam absolutely needs to maintain and grow his fan base. And Sanders represents exactly the kind of marketable star power that can accomplish that objective. So despite DePodesta's objections, despite the potential complications and media circus that everyone knew was coming, Shedeur Sanders became a Cleveland Brown. And predictably, tragically, inevitably, everything Paul DePodesta feared would happen has happened. The national spotlight has exposed every single flaw in Stefanski's coaching. The offensive system that looked mediocre and outdated with veteran quarterbacks looks absolutely prehistoric and hopeless with a rookie trying to learn it. Sanders hasn't received adequate first-team repetitions in practice. He hasn't been given an offensive scheme specifically tailored to his unique strengths and abilities. He hasn't been protected by his coaching staff when things inevitably go wrong. Instead of taking responsibility and adjusting his approach, Stefanski has publicly questioned whether the game is too fast for Sanders. He's wondered aloud whether Sanders is ready to let it rip and take chances downfield. He's expressed doubt about whether the rookie can handle NFL speed and complexity. The excuses and deflections have piled up while the losses have mounted, and Jimmy Haslam has apparently seen enough. According to our sources, and we're talking about multiple people with direct knowledge of conversations happening at the absolute highest levels of the Browns organization, Haslam recently met face-to-face with Jon Gruden to discuss not just the offensive coordinator position, but potentially the head coaching job itself. Multiple scenarios were apparently on the table during these high-level discussions. One possibility involved making Gruden the head coach immediately and hoping to retain Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator. Another option, and this is apparently the scenario gaining the most serious traction right now, involves elevating Schwartz to head coach while bringing Gruden in as offensive coordinator to completely redesign and modernize the offensive system from the ground up. And you know what? Jim Schwartz as head coach makes absolutely perfect sense when you actually look at what he's accomplished in Cleveland this season. While the offense has been a complete tire fire, an absolute disaster in every conceivable way, the Browns' defense has been legitimately elite. We're talking about one of the best defensive units in the entire league, carrying this team game after game while the offense does absolutely nothing to help them. Myles Garrett is having a historic season, chasing the single-season sack record and playing at a Defensive Player of the Year level. The defensive line is creating consistent pressure on opposing quarterbacks. The secondary is forcing turnovers and making big plays in critical moments. The run defense has been absolutely stout and physical. Everything that's actually working in Cleveland right now is happening on Jim Schwartz's side of the ball, and Haslam reportedly doesn't want to lose him to another organization that might offer him a head coaching opportunity elsewhere. Schwartz was previously the head coach in Detroit, so he has real experience running an entire organization, managing a staff, dealing with media obligations, and handling all the responsibilities that come with being the man in charge. Even though that tenure didn't end the way he would have preferred, Schwartz has clearly learned from past mistakes, paid his dues as a coordinator, and is absolutely ready for another opportunity to lead a team. The players respect him deeply. The results speak for themselves week after week. And perhaps most importantly for this specific situation, Schwartz and Gruden reportedly have a very good relationship, which would make this transition exponentially smoother than bringing in a completely new staff from outside the organization. Think about the strategic brilliance of this potential move from a pure football perspective. If Schwartz becomes head coach and maintains complete control of the defense that's already performing at an elite championship level, you essentially keep the one thing that's actually working completely untouched. Then you bring in Jon Gruden, a coach whose entire reputation and career has been built on offensive innovation and quarterback development, and you essentially turn him loose to design a completely new system specifically tailored to maximize Shader Sanders' unique abilities and strengths. This isn't about forcing a young quarterback into some rigid, outdated offensive philosophy that doesn't suit what he does best. This is about building an offense around what your quarterback excels at and scheming to attack defensive weaknesses rather than playing scared and conservative. Gruden's track record with quarterbacks is legitimately impressive when you actually examine his entire career. He took Rich Gannon from journeyman back up to league MVP. He helped develop Brad Johnson into a Super Bowl-winning quarterback in Tampa Bay. He worked extensively with Derek Carr during some of the most statistically productive years of Carr's career in Oakland. The man absolutely knows how to identify what a quarterback does well and build an offensive system that amplifies those natural strengths rather than trying to force square pegs into round holes. Can you even imagine what he could accomplish with a quarterback like Shader Sanders, who possesses elite arm talent, excellent football intelligence, and comes from a family with incredibly deep football knowledge, if Sanders was actually given a modern NFL offensive system to operate within? The timing of all this is absolutely critical, and that's where things get really interesting in terms of when official announcements might actually happen. Our sources are indicating that while changes are almost certainly coming very soon, the exact timing depends significantly on what happens this Sunday when the Browns play their next game. If Cleveland gets absolutely blown out, if the offense looks completely incompetent yet again, if there's another nationally televised embarrassing performance that makes it impossible to defend the coaching staff any longer, there's a legitimate possibility that Haslam could pull the trigger as early as Monday morning. That would be absolutely unprecedented, making a major coaching change with regular season games still remaining on the schedule. But these are desperate times in Cleveland, and desperate times call for desperate measures. The more likely scenario, according to most of our sources, is that Stefanski coaches out the remainder of the season and gets fired immediately afterward. possibly within hours of the final game ending. That would allow Gruden to come in during the brief window before the offseason officially begins, start evaluating the roster and offensive personnel, and begin designing his new system with direct input from Sanders about what concepts and plays he's most comfortable executing. By the time the official offseason program begins in the spring, you could have a completely new offensive philosophy installed and ready to be taught, giving Sanders an entire offseason to master it before next season starts. But here's the scenario that has league insiders absolutely buzzing with speculation and excitement. What if Haslam decides he simply can't wait any longer? What if he looks at the remaining games on the schedule and realizes that every additional week with Stefanski running the offense is another week of completely wasted development time for Sanders? What if he decides that getting Gruden in the building immediately, even if just to observe and evaluate for the final few games, is worth the media firestorm and organizational awkwardness that would inevitably come from such an unconventional move? That would be vintage Jimmy Haslam, making an impulsive decision that creates absolute chaos in the short term, but might actually be the correct move long term. The reaction around the league to these rumors has been absolutely fascinating to monitor and track. Some analysts are questioning whether Gruden is actually the right fit, pointing to his age, the fact that he's been away from coaching for a few years now, and the controversy that led to his departure from the Raiders organization. Others are defending the potential hire enthusiastically and passionately, arguing that Gruden's football knowledge hasn't diminished one bit, that his quarterback expertise is exactly precisely what Cleveland desperately needs, and that pairing him with a defensive-minded head coach like Schwartz creates an ideal balance of responsibilities and expertise. Players around the league who have previously worked with Gruden have been overwhelmingly positive in their assessments when asked about him by reporters. They consistently talk about his meticulous preparation, his obsessive attention to detail, his remarkable ability to communicate incredibly complex concepts in ways that players can actually understand and execute on the field. They mention his infectious passion for the game, his willingness to constantly adapt and innovate rather than stubbornly sticking with what worked a decade ago, and his proven track record of developing quarterbacks into better players than they were before working with him. These aren't just generic platitudes or politically correct responses either. These are specific, detailed examples of how Gruden helped individual players improve their technique, expand their understanding of defensive schemes and coverages, and perform at significantly higher levels than they had previously achieved in their careers. For Shedeur Sanders specifically, having someone like Jon Gruden designing plays and calling the offensive game plan could be absolutely transformative and career-defining. Sanders has been forced to operate in an offensive system that simply doesn't suit his natural strengths and abilities. He's working with a play caller who seems far more interested in establishing the run and playing conservative than attacking defenses vertically and putting the ball in his playmakers' hands in space. Gruden's offenses throughout his career have been aggressive, creative, and quarterback-centric. He understands how to use pre-snap motion to identify defensive coverages before the ball is even snapped. He knows how to design route combinations that create natural, easy throws for quarterbacks rather than forcing them into difficult, contested situations. He's not afraid to take shots downfield when the matchups are favorable, and the defense gives you the look you want. All of these elements are exactly precisely what Sanders needs to succeed at the NFL level. The business implications of this potential move are absolutely enormous and cannot be overlooked when analyzing why Haslam might be pushing for this change so aggressively right now. Cleveland is currently building a brand new stadium that will open in just a few years, and that stadium represents a massive financial investment that needs to be justified through sustained fan interest, ticket sales, and revenue generation. Having Jon Gruden as your offensive coordinator immediately makes the Browns a significantly more interesting team from a national perspective. Having Shedeur Sanders operating in a Gruden-designed offense creates must-watch television that draws viewers from far beyond just Cleveland's local market. The combination could legitimately make the Browns relevant in primetime games and nationally televised broadcasts in a way they haven't been in literal decades. Merchandise sales would almost certainly spike dramatically with this kind of high-profile coaching change and offensive transformation. Fans who have been frustrated, disengaged, and essentially checked out all season would suddenly have legitimate reason to believe things might actually improve going forward. Season ticket renewals for the new stadium would get a significant boost. Corporate sponsorship opportunities would expand considerably. From a pure business perspective, even if you completely set aside all the football considerations, this move makes tremendous sense for Haslam as an owner trying to maximize the financial value of his franchise. The Paul DePodesta angle to this entire situation adds yet another fascinating layer of intrigue that we absolutely cannot ignore. DePodesta, the analytics-focused general manager who came to Cleveland with big ideas about modernizing the organization and implementing cutting-edge evaluation methods, is now completely out of the picture. His departure happened relatively quietly without a tremendous amount of media attention or coverage, but the timing is extremely suspicious when you consider everything else happening simultaneously. Did DePodesta resign because he saw what was coming and wanted no part of the inevitable disaster? Was he forced out because Haslam was tired of having someone constantly question his football decisions? Did the Sanders draft pick create an irreparable rift between owner and general manager that made it impossible to continue working together productively? Our sources strongly suggest that DePodesta absolutely wanted out once Sanders was drafted, knowing full well that the intense scrutiny and national attention that would inevitably follow would expose organizational weaknesses that he couldn't fix fast enough to avoid blame. He understood that Stefanski's significant limitations as an offensive coach would become painfully, embarrassingly obvious once Sanders arrived, and national media members started actually watching Browns games closely every single week. He knew that the offensive line issues, the lack of elite playmakers at skill positions, and the outdated scheme would all be magnified under the spotlight. Rather than take the blame for those failures that he didn't create and couldn't fix quickly, he apparently chose to exit before the inevitable implosion happened. Whether Haslam was smart enough to anticipate DePodesta wanting out, or whether he genuinely thought DePodesta would stay and help navigate the Sanders era, remains somewhat unclear. What is absolutely crystal clear is that Haslam now has complete and total control over football operations, without a general manager questioning his decisions or pushing back against his instincts, and he's apparently using that control to make the coaching changes he's wanted to make for well over a year now. Let's talk about Kevin Stefanski's record over his last 36 games, because this number tells you absolutely everything you need to know about why change is not just necessary, but overdue. He's won just 5 games and lost 31 over that span. That's not just bad. That's not merely disappointing or below expectations. That's historically, catastrophically terrible for a coach who won Coach of the Year just a few seasons ago. That kind of dramatic collapse suggests systematic problems that go far beyond just roster talent deficiencies or bad luck with injuries. That's a coach who has completely lost the locker room. That's a coach whose schemes have been thoroughly figured out by opposing coordinators. That's a coach who cannot or will not adapt and adjust when things aren't working. The fact that Stefanski survived this long with that kind of abysmal record is honestly remarkable and speaks to either Haslam's extraordinary patience or his indecisiveness, depending on how charitably you want to interpret it. The defense that Jim Schwartz has built represents what could have been if the entire organization was coached with the same level of competence, intensity, and creativity that Schwartz brings to his side of the ball every single week. Imagine for just a moment if the offense was even average. Not spectacular or elite or championship caliber, just middle of the pack, functional, capable of sustaining drives and putting points on the board. This Browns team could legitimately be competing for a playoff spot right now with how exceptionally well the defense has performed all season long. Instead, they're evaluating whether to make coaching changes mid-season or wait just a few more weeks. All because one side of the ball is completely broken and dysfunctional, while the other side operates at an elite championship level. For Cleveland Browns fans who have suffered through literal decades of disappointment, false hope, broken promises, and organizational chaos, this potential coaching change represents something they've desperately craved for years: real accountability, the willingness to admit a mistake and actually correct it, rather than stubbornly sticking with obvious failure out of misplaced pride or fear of admitting error. If Haslam actually follows through and fires Stefanski, if he actually brings in Gruden and elevates Schwartz to head coach, if he actually commits to building an offense specifically around Sanders' strengths rather than forcing him into an incompatible system, it would represent a fundamental shift in how this organization operates and makes decisions.